Let's talk about the secret language of Midjourney and the surprising truth about prompt syntax. Do you write your prompts like this? Imagine big brown dog, comma, honeypot, comma, bees flying around. Or maybe you even do something crazy like this. Imagine big brown dog in brackets, comma, honeypot in quotation marks, comma, bees flying around with dashes. Have you ever wondered whether it even makes a difference? Well, the answer is, it depends. So let's look at some real-life tests and finally clear up some of the myths that have been flying around about prompt syntax. So let me give you a quick overview of some of the questions that we're going to answer today. Short prompts or long prompts? What is better? Does Midjourney understand grammar, and does punctuation matter? What happens if you use extreme text weights in your prompt? And why you should be careful when you reroll a prompt with a seed. So before we get started, let me just quickly apologize for my voice. I've been sick the past few days and I've not fully recovered yet. So if my voice sounds a bit rougher and deeper than usual, I really apologize. I've done my best, but I had to start recording something. So you're going to have to live with it today. So what's better? A short prompt like this one. Imagine beautiful woman, comma, pink hair, comma, warrior. And I'm going to add a seed of 1. Or maybe a slightly longer prompt like this one. Imagine beautiful woman, comma, pink hair, comma, warrior, comma, Bavaria, comma, barbarian. Or maybe a much more detailed one like this. Imagine a beautiful woman, pink Cleopatra hair, warrior princess, Bavaria culture, barbarian warlord. Well, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. Some of the most interesting and creative images that I've ever seen only used a couple of words. So let's have a quick look at how these 3 prompts actually turn out. Let's start with the first one. Imagine beautiful woman, pink hair, warrior, seed 1. Okay, so I think this one is pretty clear. You have a woman who is clearly a warrior and we've given her pink hair. And I guess that's simple enough, right? So what happens if we now enter this prompt? Imagine beautiful woman, pink hair, warrior, and this time we're going to add Bavaria and barbarian. All right, so after adding the terms Bavaria and barbarian, you would normally expect to see something that's slightly wilder or rougher about her image. So in this particular case, you can primarily see it in the armor that she's wearing, particularly in the 2 lower cases here. You can see that this is not the classic sort of armor that we had before. This is more close to something that we would know from the, like from the TV series Barbarians. So let's generate our third prompt where we add even more details to the prompt. Imagine beautiful woman, pink Cleopatra hair, warrior princess, Bavaria culture, barbarian warlord. So far, the 2 previous images have been quite similar to each other. However, the third one is quite different because we've introduced additional information into each one of the segments. So this changes the way Midjourney interprets the prompt quite a bit. However, it also means that it dilutes all of the other elements that we've added into the prompt. Let me quickly show you each one of these 3 images side by side. I'm going to start off by opening the first one, then the second one, and finally the third one. Here's number 1, number 2. These are very close, but then there's number 3. And even though the characters mostly seem to be the same or similar, it's fundamentally different, while the first 2 are more close to each other. Okay, I'm quickly going to close these 3 images. And some people have claimed that it makes a big difference whether you add things at the beginning or at the end of the prompt. And they say that things that are further towards the beginning are given more importance in how Midjourney interprets them. But I'm honestly not quite sure. So let's have a quick look and see whether it's true. So I'm going to mix up the prompt and switch around the positions of the different words that I used. It's still the same very detailed prompt, the third one. However, I've moved Bavaria culture and barbarian warlord towards the front of the prompt, and just to see whether it makes a difference in the image that I'm given. So I'm quickly going to generate these images. All right, so let's have a quick look. I'm going to quickly open up the original one. This is the one where we had the words in the correct order. And I want you to pay special attention to the ones on the right here. I'm going to open up the second one now. This is the new one with the changed order. And you'll notice that the ones on the right here, they're still the same roughly. Yes, the characters on the left have changed, but we are still getting the same type of image, the same type of character. It might be a different character, but the way they look is very similar to each other. So let's check out what this might look like with a shorter prompt. I'm going to quickly enter imagine warrior, pink hair, beautiful woman. I've changed the order here again, and let's see what we get. Okay, and let's have a quick look. As you can see, there's still no big difference. These still look very much like the original ones. So let me just quickly scroll up to show you. This would be the comparison. This is the original one in the right order, and all we did was change the order of the words, and what you get is this. And it looks effectively the same. So what exactly does this mean for us? Well, first of all, longer prompts are not necessarily prettier. Longer prompts also allow you to add more details which may or may not be visible in the final image. And there's no obvious evidence that words at the beginning are more important than those at the end of the prompt. Alright, so next, let's have a look at whether Midjourney is actually capable of understanding grammar and punctuation. We're going to look at whether this prompt with commas is the same as this prompt that has absolutely no commas. And guess what? We're even going to compare it to these prompts, which contain periods, slashes, brackets, and even quotation marks. So to speed things up, I'm just going to quickly generate all of them in one go, and then we'll compare them side by side. Okay, so here's the one with commas. We've already seen this one before, but now let me compare this one to the one without any commas, just spaces. And it looks actually pretty much the same. I want you to pay special attention to the women in the bottom right and the bottom left corner, and not necessarily on this image, but the top right corner will be important as well later on. If I switch between these two, you can see that the two characters in the bottom right images are slightly different, but not fundamentally. It's still interpreting the concept in the same way. It's just giving us slightly different ways of displaying them. So my personal theory is that it's still understanding the prompt in roughly the same way. The only reason it's giving us slightly different images is because there are more characters in the prompt, because there's commas or there are not. And if we now look at the other ones, you'll notice that the same thing applies to periods, slashes, and brackets. Look at this one. This is with the periods. You'll see that we remember this lady from the first one, and these two at the bottom, we know them as well. This one on the top left, she's different. Now this time, let me look at slashes. Same thing. Now she's still the same. Actually, these are almost identical in terms of the characters. And if I now look at brackets, then we get this one, and still we've got her on the top right, the bottom right, and the bottom left, who are all the same women. So there really isn't a big difference between these. So the only one where I saw more differences was when I used quotation marks. They still contain mostly the same characters. The one on the top right and bottom left are the same women. However, there seems to be much more focus on this pink sort of head decoration or something, and there's a lot more golden sort of armor or not armor, more like jewelry, right? Now, I cannot say with absolute certainty that there actually is something different about the quotation marks, because officially Midjourney says there are not. However, maybe there are. I don't know. But overall, it's still understanding the prompt roughly the same way. So clearly, and let me quickly close these images, Midjourney doesn't really care about punctuation. That is quite obvious. But what about grammar and sentence structure? Does that make a difference? Well, in order to determine this, I'm going to mix up my prompts a little bit more. So in this first experiment, I'm going to change the order of the words and see whether it actually matters whether the words that belong together are actually placed together. So for example, my prompt will look like this. Imagine Bavaria, woman, Cleopatra, hair, warrior, culture, beautiful, barbarian, pink, princess, warlord. So some of these words have been mixed up so much that they're no longer placed next to the ones that they should be placed to. And let's have a look at what Midjourney gives us. Okay, so let's have a look. Still no big difference, right? It's still roughly the exact same thing. Okay, so let me go one step further. This time, I'm literally going to remove all the spaces. That's right, I'm going to remove all spaces. I'm just going to create one long word. So I'm going to enter imagine, beautiful woman, pink Cleopatra hair, warrior, princess, Bavaria, culture, barbarian, warlord. In this case, I'm using the original prompt. And there's not a single space. And Midjourney clearly has stated themselves that spaces are actually recognized. Let's see what happens. And guess what? The results are still mostly the same. Yes, I will admit that, yes, these women are now, it's a little bit more different characters now, except for the one on the top right. It's still the same woman. But the style and what it's understanding and what it's giving us is more or less the same thing. So what exactly does that mean for us? Well, first of all, punctuation is mostly irrelevant. That's a given. However, it's still good practice to use commas to structure your prompt in a conveniently readable format. In other words, if it's easier for you to read your own prompts and understand what you're actually putting in there, well then use commas. My goodness, go ahead. The order of the words also isn't as important as people think. It also looks like spaces are less important than what is generally accepted as fact. So the only truly relevant separator is the double colon, which is used for multi-prompts and text weights. So let's quickly move on to that. Now, before we get into this, not all of you may be familiar with text weights and multi-prompts. I actually have a dedicated video on this called Activate God Mode in Midjourney. If you've already seen it, great. Then the next few insights will be very useful to you. If you haven't seen it yet, I do recommend that you check out that video once you finish this one. While it doesn't specifically address how to best use multi-prompts, it does explain text weights quite well. Anyway, so if we take my original long prompt and break it down into multiple segments with a double colon, then we'll get something that looks a little bit like this. Imagine beautiful, double colon, pink Cleopatra hair, double colon, warrior princess, Bavaria culture, barbarian warlord, seed 1. So the only thing that's really changed here is that we've replaced the comma with double colons. So the difference is small, but it actually has a massive impact on the images that you're going to produce. Let me show you real quick. Okay. This is quite shocking, isn't it? It looks completely different from the other ones. Now, the only problem with this is that the way we structure the prompt now, every single segment only contributes about 20% to the overall image. So let's say the princess and Bavaria part are very important to me. Then I could increase their weighting to something much higher. So in this case, we're going to use about 20. But what exactly is that going to do with the weighting of the others? Well, since the impact of the weights is always the weighted average, those two elements that I've now increased are going to account for a total of 92% in the entire prompt, while the other three are only going to account for about 8%. So let's have a real quick look at what that looks like. Imagine prompt woman, I'm going to add the warrior princess with 20 and Bavaria culture 20 as well. And if I take a closer look, we can clearly see that the warrior princess has been emphasized a lot more. And there are elements that do suggest that there's a lot more Bavaria culture or whatever Midjourney understands by the word Bavaria culture. However, the other three segments of our prompt are now almost completely meaningless. And you could probably even remove them altogether and the image would not look very different. So I'm going to enter imagine warrior princess with a weighting of 20 and Bavaria culture with a weighting of 20. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, so let's have a look, and specifically the ones at the top, because they are almost the same as before. And just to make prove a point, I'm going to open up this one in a separate tab. I'm going to open up the old one in a separate tab. This is the old one. This is the new one. And look at the two women at the top. There's no big difference. The ones at the bottom are just different variations. So if you actually want to give those other three segments some importance as well, if you're going to increase any of the weights that much, then you need to make sure that you also adjust the other weights so that they don't get lost. So what does all of this mean? Well, each additional segment dilutes the importance of all other segments. You also need to be careful how you use your weights, and the use of extreme values might render the rest of your prompt completely meaningless. Okay, so there's one last thing that I would like to address real quick. You've probably noticed that I've been using the seed parameter with a value of 1 in order to keep things as consistent and comparable as possible. If you're not familiar with this, make sure you check out my dedicated video on how to use the seed parameter. Anyway, so contrary to what many people have claimed, using the same seed is actually very consistent across each generation. And it doesn't matter whether you do it today, tomorrow, or next week, Midjourney version 4 will always return the same image. If you are getting different results, then it means that you've changed something about the prompt, and it can be something as small as a single letter. So if you mistyped, for example, a W and you put in a V, you will get a completely different result. As long as your prompt is exactly the same and you're using the same seed, the image that you get will be the same. However, this is actually only true when you're entering it as a command. In other words, as soon as you hit the reroll button, which is, for example, this button here or that button here, you are going to get completely different results. So why is that? Well, because as soon as you hit the reroll button, it actually replaces your seed number with something completely random. It might still show the number seed at the top, but that's only what you see. The underlying seed is actually a different one. And you can actually verify this if you ask Midjourney to send you all of the details about the job by reacting with the envelope icon. And you'll see that your original command will have the seed of, for example, 1, but your reroll will have a completely different number. So what does this mean? Well, it means only use the reroll button if you do not care about setting a seed. And reroll is primarily meant to give you completely different results. So it's pretty much the opposite of using a seed. I'm pretty sure you'll find that knowing all of the things that I've just shown you and also proven to you will be quite useful for you in the future. Just imagine all those pointless changes that you've been making to your prompts, somehow expecting or hoping that you get a different result, even though it rarely even mattered. And if you haven't been using a seed in the first place, well, then you've probably been fooling yourself about the impact of your changes anyway. Again, I cannot stress this enough. If you do not know how to use the seed parameter, check out my dedicated video right here that will show you how to do so. And if you're curious to find out how to gain more control over your prompts using text weights, then I absolutely recommend that you check out this video here called Activate God Mode in Midjourney. Even though it only scratches the surface of what's possible in Midjourney, I still think it's going to blow your mind. Have fun learning, and take care.